So welcome to the Health Evolution Collective. I'm really excited to be talking today to regenerative farmer and more, Charlie Arnott. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to chat to me today.
That's a pleasure, Tracy. Great to be with you on the show.
Well, I'm really excited. I have to say I'm excited and nervous because normally with my guests on the show, I have a little bit of knowledge about what it is that we're going to be talking about. But I have to be really honest to say that it's an area, farming is not something that I know a lot about at all. And I certainly know my listeners are probably very keen to learn more about this as well. So I'm really excited just to learn what you do, why you do it, what your journey has been, and how, everyday people can support you and continue to support what you do. And, it's just such an area that is so confusing. There's so much misinformation out there. So really excited to hear everything that you've got to say. Thank you.
Where would you like me to start, Tracy?
I know. Well, isn't that crazy? Because I've just read so much about you and I don't really know where to start. Maybe start with telling everyone where it is that you live, where's your farm, and we'll work backwards from there.
No, that's easy. And look, you're right. There's a lot of, it's easy to be confused like anything, I guess, if you're not living in that space and not familiar with, a lot of the language even can be quite, confusing. And there's more and more in the certainly regenerative agriculture space, even the definition of what is regenerative agriculture. There's people who really get pretty worked up about, what is it? And it needs to be defined, and we need to have certification around that. And then there are other people, and I'm a bit more in this camp, where it's sort of, well, I think that the definition is more, it's very non-prescriptive, because it's like regenerative agriculture in itself is non-prescriptive. It's about the adaptation of practices to your situation, your business, your life, your values, and all those sort of things. So I'm very cautious not to put it into a box. Why people need to put it into a box is entirely up to them, and they have probably good reason to do so if that's what they want to do. But I'm a bit more relaxed about it. So that's just to get an overall picture of, I guess, where regenerative agriculture sort of sits. And I guess for your listeners, I live on I live in two places at the moment. I grew up on a farm. That's clever, isn't it? Living in two places. I'm very lucky that I have to say. I grew up on a farm at Boorowa many years ago, and I had a very blessed childhood in that I was I lived on a farm. I lived, my family on a farm. We climbed trees, we rode bikes, we swam in dams, we moved cattle, we moved sheep. It was there was work, it was hard, but it was fun, and I've got really fond memories of my life at Boorowa, at Hanaminno. And we were living at the time. It was a very conventional sort of farming situation there, Tracy, in that it was a high input, high output farming. It was a mixed farm, and that's a typical farm at Boorowa, and still is. Sheep, cattle, cropping, making hay, trading animals, growing wool, that sort of thing. It's that landscape is well suited to a mixed sort of farming situation. So that's what I knew, and that's what I grew up enjoying. And then I did secondary school. I sort of didn't do agriculture at secondary school, but I had, agricultural interests at the ag club and cattle and sheep and all sorts of stuff. Tertiary education for me was very ag focused. It was rural science. I did rural science at the University of New England, 4-year degree, and that was also reflective of my upbringing on a farm, on a conventional mixed farm. Very science-based and I didn't know it at the time, very reductive. It was sort of, this is soil chemistry, this is soil physics, this is soil biology, this is how it all worked, this is how, genetics of sheep, yada yada. In isolation, there was not really checkpoints along the way where students can identify clearly how it all fits in. It was a process of learning, like conventional education is, and You know, you learn this and you tick a box and you do an exam and away you go, and you know it then. But obviously, like most things, you apply it to the real world, it's very different. And then, so some years after that, I finished up at the university, did a few other things, and I moved home in 1997. I moved back to the farm at Boorowa and applied what I knew. And what, you know, it was a combination of what I knew from my father and growing up on the land there, and also what I'd learned at university, you know, the new technology and, you know, big input sort of stuff. And that was fine. So I guess that's sort of my background. We've got 5,000 acres there at Boorowa. It has grown in the last sort of 10 to 15 years in terms of number of acres we're managing. And certainly our focus has been very different. As of, you know, 15, 16 years ago, up to that point, as I'd explained, high input, high output, very mixed farming, very prescriptive farming. And then about 15, 16 years ago, we had a big change of mind, I guess. Do you want me to tell you about that?
Yeah, well, it says, yes, please, because it says it says that you had a series of epiphanies. So, yeah, please share.
Yeah, well, I guess it was a series of epiphanies. I mean, the significant one that I talk about was going to a one-day course called Profiting from the Drought. And it was that in itself sort of was kind of weird to see that in the local paper as an advertisement for, you know, farmers to get along to, profiting from the drought. So I went along, not quite sure what they were going to bang on about, and it was life-changing in that they being RCS Australia, Resource Consulting Service Australia, they had really for the first time. And I'd been to many courses, many sort of, you know, government-sponsored courses, many independent sort of courses, but they're all still pretty conventional. They were still all about high input, high output, production focus. And, you know, this one-day course really, for the first time, I think ever in my farming career, got me to think about me in the context of farming. You know, up to that point, I'd been, you know, a principal, a manager, a body, you know, working, doing stuff in a landscape and trying to make money and run a business. And it wasn't until that course they actually, it was more about the people. It was more about what's going on up here than, you know, out in the paddock. And that was, as I said, it was life-changing in that it was uncomfortable, really, to be asked questions like, are you happy? You don't get that at the pub on a Friday night. No one's asked you if you're happy. So I mean, it's such a simple question, but it really made me think about, well, was I? And my answer to that was, well, I'm not unhappy, which is pretty poor, really. So, look, that was an epiphany or a turning point. A month later, I did a week-long course run by the same guys at RCS, and that was full on. That just blew my head off. Opened everything right up. Lots of questions, a few answers, and they lead you to answers. They don't say you do this and you do that. I'll shut that door. You find the answers, and we don't find all the answers, but you get very curious and you get very uncomfortable. But that's a really good thing. That's a really good thing. I heard a great thing on the radio or somewhere this morning or yesterday about emergency. The word emergency is, the word there is emerge. It's not until you have an emergency that you emerge from that situation into a new thing, it's not until humans hit an emergency, whether it's a death or a financial crisis or a COVID, it's an emergency where we emerge from, or hopefully we emerge from, as a new or a different or a better thing. And really, I emerged from that day and that subsequent week a different person, because I just had a different framework for what I was doing. A different framework for making decisions, for relating to myself. you know, and relating to my family, to the other people involved in the business, to relating to the landscape. You know, I had an economic relationship with the landscape. To that point, I was, it was a resource. You know, I was like, yep, that's an asset. I've got dirt, I've got trees, I've got grass, I've got water that, you know, falls every now and again. They're ingredients to a recipe to make money and make, you know, wool, meat, wheat, whatever. And that's fine, and it does work. You know, it works. It's not that it doesn't work, but it wasn't aligned with my values. You know, and that was another thing I got was no one ever asked me what my values were. I didn't know what they were. You know? Values. What? So literally do an exercise where you identify what your values are. You know, honesty, transparency, authenticity, trust, whatever they are. You know, courage, and that's not stuff that farmers talk about. You know, that's it's really. I mean, having said that, there's more. You know, there's people are. The older I get, and the more. A lot of my mates at Boorowa don't do what I do, but more are getting interested, and it's really. And I applaud them. You know, it's a very courageous thing to look back on one's life and not be critical of it, but just to question it. That's a really powerful thing, and it is quite confronting. And to get to a point where you might think, oh, maybe I should do things differently. You know, it's easy to think that what you did was wrong, but I think it's much more important to identify, look, that's just what you knew at the time, and that's what I knew at the time. That's what Dad knew at the time. I was privy to information that, you know, changed the way I thought. Really, you know, it's hard to knock behaviour. You know, you can think things and know things, but then to actually implement them is a whole different thing. So in terms of implementation, what did I do? You know, I changed the way I ran my stock. Instead of having all these little mobs everywhere, I put them all together, and that relates to a particular way of managing my grazing. You know, which is another podcast series right there, Tracy. I think, but you know, for farmers, it'd probably be pretty boring for all your listeners, but it's fascinating stuff. We can get to it later on, but it's about, you know, it's not a very big step from a farming point of view, going from how do we manage sheep and cattle in the landscape, and in a productive way that actually heals the landscape and improves the environment, and also grows much better food. Essentially, you know, the quality of that food. So I changed the way I thought about growing food. You know, I was a commodity farmer, so I grew wheat. I grew, you know, wool and lamb and beef and hay and all sorts of things, oats, a whole lot of stuff. But we were just selling it just into the open market. You know, we were growing it before we knew who we were going to sell it to. We were hoping someone was going to buy it at the other end. And it was mainly about quantity. Yes, quality plays a part. You know, you want it to be high quality so you can get a better price for your wheat, you know, as an example. But I would not have baked a loaf of bread with the wheat I produced. I probably didn't think about it at the time, but I'm glad I didn't, because it would have probably poisoned me. You know, the stuff we put on it, the storage, chemicals we used, that sort of thing. And I didn't think about who was going to eat that wheat. So I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to spray this wheat with, you know, a chemical halfway through its growth cycle, which potentially could be residual, and then that might end up on someone's plate. That didn't even, not even a consideration. You know, I was production focused, and you know, once something left my front gate on a truck, as long as someone paid me for it, that was fine. You know. And that's not, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's just the way, again, it was. You know, we were focused on our job. Our job was to produce something to sell. And so now I consider myself a food grower. You know, so given that change in thinking, there's just some things we don't do anymore. You know, we don't spray chemical on the backs of animals to get rid of lice or internal parasites. You know, we don't spray chemical on pasture to try and kill weeds that we don't actually call weeds anymore. You know, it wasn't like I guess you make one decision, it has a cascading effect on lots of decisions you make, but they're all related, you know. Things aren't working in isolation anymore. And so grazing management changed. We started using biodynamics. You know, a couple of years after that, I met Hamish Mackay, who's probably one of Australia's, you know, and maybe one of the world's best facilitators and educators in biodynamics. His very practical approach to its use. So we met, and it really resonated with me, his message. You know, a lot of the biodynamic principles are, there's some that's based in science, and there's some that's, you know, one would think far from scientific, but it resonates with me. It resonates with a lot of people, and it makes a lot of sense. You know, I'm kind of pleased that science hasn't pulled it apart and found out all the answers, because it takes the mystery out, you know. And that's just not how life is. Nature doesn't work that way either. So, and just on nature, you know, one thing we did, we started working with nature. You know, nature was, you know, in some ways it was not the enemy. I mean, you sometimes think it was the enemy given what we used to do to it. But, you know, I'd wake up every morning and generally kill stuff. You know, I was killing, some days it was only bugs, some days it was fungus, some days it was, you know, probably soil, you know, microbes in the soil, some days it was animals, you know. And that was, you know, so I was battling nature. That was our language. You know, that's still the language you see in the newspapers, like, you know, farmers battling drought, you know, farmers battling bushfire. I mean, it's a different thing, but, you know, that's another conversation about how do we get to the point where the bushfires were so horrendous that it burnt that much land, and, you know, what was the management that did or didn't take place over those many years that could or couldn't have changed that, you know. So so now, I guess, as a point of reference, we work with nature now. You know, we actually work with and beside and behind nature, because nature's generally got most of the answers we need. We just got to read the signs. We've got to, you know, read the playbook and let it do its thing and step out of that. David Marsh, who's a mentor of mine, he has a great quote. You know, paraphrasing, he basically said he used to think himself as a healer. You know, his journey is amazing and not that dissimilar to mine in terms of, you know, conventional to what we do now. But he used to think himself as a healer, but he's now really worked out that his role is one where he might step out of the picture a bit more and let nature run its course, and with a bit of prodding and poking and observing and responding, it's doing a pretty good job of doing what it needs to do to heal, you know.
Can I say something on that? Because I just saw you post that on your Instagram, and I reshared it because I thought that was amazing. And I have to just say here, what you've been talking about, I can't help but sit and think about the parallels. Now, most of my listeners, there's men and women, but of course we're in the health space. It's about, you know, healing our body as well, and, you know, looking at what we put in it in terms of what happens and all that sort of stuff. And your journey just has shown my listeners what I talk about all the time, in that this is how change happens. In fact, it's the only way change happens, from insight, from new thinking, from new thought. And look how your whole life has changed from having a change of thinking and, you know, just becoming aware of your values, and how that flow and effect is enormous. And that is exactly how change happens. It's the only way that change happens. Yet, you know, most of my clients will, you know, they want to go on a diet. They want to, you know, manipulate this, manipulate that, try and get that. And then you ended with that quote. It's exactly what I say to my clients as well. You know, if we get out of our body's way, if we fuel it in a way that we're designed as an evolutionary human species to eat, it's going to do the healing for us. That's what it's capable of. So I just wanted to highlight that there's so many similarities. I love what your journey and where it's taking you and taken you. So much in that.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
You touched on a really good point. it sort of talks to my reference there before about I'm a food grower now. I have a responsibility to produce food to feed people. You know, I either contribute to their health or I don't. You know, and I do positively or negatively. You know, and you're absolutely right that you know, the health of the landscape is a reflection of our own health and vice versa. You know, yeah, there is that saying, you are what you eat, but it really should be you eat what you are. You know, if you have the right mindset, if you've got, I say to people, don't go out in the paddock and just do stuff because your neighbour did or you read it in a book or something. You've got to change the paddock between your ears first to really understand the context of that. You know, you got the content in a book. Wow, that's cool, but where does it fit into your situation? And you know, and the health of oneself and their thinking, and you know, it has to be, you know, it's going to be reflected in their landscape, you know, and then their decision making and what they feed their children and what environment they're going to grow up in. You know, we don't spray chemical all over the place anymore. I used to have this really cool spray rig, you know, truck and boom and tank and chemical everywhere, and you know, I thought it was the bee's knees because I was killing stuff and I was doing something. You know, I'm a man, I need to do stuff, and make an impact, and I could see it. You know, a week later it was all dead, and I was like, yeah. But you know what? I was probably killing myself at the same time. You know, with the crap I was spraying, and I certainly wasn't helping the quality of the stuff I was spraying it on. So, so there's, you know, there was a real mindset shift for me in terms of responsibility of food production, the environment my family was going to grow up in, what legacy I was leaving, what was getting washed down the creek to my neighbour, even, you know, and that sort of those impacts. So, and you know, the link between this is the wonderful thing, I guess, about regenerative ag, or one of the many things, is it's as a topic, as a thing in the world, you know, it has the potential to sequester a whole lot of carbon, and that's through grazing management, and that's another story. Whether it's growing trees or growing grass, it's a similar sort of process, sort of. And so we have the tools, and we have the know-how, and we have the opportunity with the landscape that we manage to save the planet. Not to make too much of a point on it, but you know, I often tell farmers, don't think of that way, even though often people, you know, say farmers are the only solution and you got to save the planet. It's like, whoa, that's a big burden to shoulder. Let's just start with your property. So there's the sort of the environmental impact, the very positive impact we can make, but there's also the impact we can have on human health through the production of clean, healthy, nutritious food. And that is not generally what Australian agriculture or the global agriculture is doing. It's producing a commodity that is, you know, it's, what do they say? It's, we're undernourished and overfed. You know, it's empty food, and you know, it's and that's a real point of difference for farmers who are working with nature and you know, reducing or have no chemical use. You know, they are producing something that's not killing someone, and it's actually contributing to their health in a really positive way, and more importantly to their children, because you know, kids aren't doing the shopping, mums and dads are, and if they're informed and they really take seriously their responsibility, food is one of the most important ways and most significant ways that they can actually impact their health and their life and their lifestyle. You know, anyone's interested in how chemicals can affect human health, look up epigenetics and how many chemicals that are frequently found and used in agriculture, you know, actually change the way one's genes are expressed, and how, you know, it's just fascinating, some of the stuff that is it's fascinating and scary. It's really scary. How did we get to that, Tracy? I'm just rambling now.
I'm not sure, but it's fascinating. It is. I love it. I love it. So can you just sum up for us a little bit, like what, in your words, in your opinion, you know, what is the regenerative farmer? I mean, I know you've kind of touched on it there, but, you know, for us, for the people listening who, you know, what is your main goal? So what is your main goal now of farming? I mean, I know there's heaps.
Well, we have a business. Our business, BHAG. I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with that term. BHAG is big, hairy, audacious goal. I think it's, I'm not sure if it's a Stephen Covey or someone else, Michael Gerber maybe, but it's certainly a businessy thing. And it's, you know, people who have BHAGs, you know, sort of work on 20 to 25 years. Ours is, and I'm paraphrasing, that we inspire businesses and farmers around Australia to create, you know, farming businesses and rural communities that are localised and are supported and supporting each other in terms of, you know, socially, culturally, and from a nutritional point of view. So, you know, if supermarkets didn't exist in 25 years' time in all rural localities and towns, I think that'd be a really good thing, because it means that there's, you know, well, maybe supermarkets, but not the big ones. And anything in those supermarkets is all grown locally, because, you know, yes, we can't grow bananas at Boorowa, and, you know, maybe we let a few bananas sneak over the border one day when we can. But I mean, my point is that people understand that the food is seasonal. It can be produced there. The food that is produced in your locality is actually the best that is best for you, because it actually suits your needs for having lived in that environment. You know, it's the and your body will tell you that. So, yeah, you know, supporting food systems that keep it local, keep it clean, keep it fresh, keep it nutritiously dense, and as an example, using biodynamics to do that. That's our goal, I guess. You know, and then look, there's many ways that we're looking to do that. You know, talking about it, doing it, producing the food, selling it locally, supporting others to do that, helping them spread their message. Yes, we're selling meat into Sydney, and that's, you know, 300 and so kilometres away. It's still local, I believe, in that it's, you know, it's still supporting only a couple of sets of hands between us and there. It's not like going through 12 sets of hands and feeding everyone else and propping up their business models. It's people that we care about along the way that we're helping support their businesses. At the end of the day, Sydney needs food tomorrow. You know, if we can emulate somewhat what they did in Cuba all those years ago in the oil crisis and start growing their own food and support themselves, that'd be wonderful. You know, I consider that there's so much land in Sydney or Canberra or Brisbane or wherever that, you know, we can be growing a lot of food locally. So, and you know what, having a BHAG that's 25 years out is cool, because no one can say that's not going to work. You're not going to achieve that, because they've either forgotten by then or you've done it, or, you know, like, who's to say that can't be done?
That's right. I agree. I mean, there's probably a lot of potential obstacles, opportunities and stuff that are going to come up in the way that I'd love to get your insight on. But I want to have a little chat to you about why you mentioned the supermarket. So excuse my, you know, my not getting my questions out really clearly, but
my answers aren't very clear anyway.
No, they're wonderful. There's so much disconnect between most people who live in the city now and the food that we eat. And of course, I think this is just my thoughts around it all, because, you know, there's such a push now for the world to become vegan. Some very influential, you know, global things are pushing for vegan. There's a real misconception that beef cows are the cause of climate change. And there's such a, you know, I follow Diana Rogers' Sustainable Dish. I've learned a lot from her, from what she's been doing recently. But I look every day, you know, like, she's fantastic. But, you know, I go to the supermarket and it's so easy to have no understanding of what that food has, where it's been, where it's come from, you know, what's gone into producing that food. And then, you know, I think there's generations now, like, I've never really been on a farm, you know, like we just are so disconnected from where our food comes from. Yet as human beings, we evolved to hunt and gather. You know, we're hunters and gatherers, and food was, you know, a lot harder to come by, you know, generations, eons ago. But now it's just so easy, and that disconnect is something that I think we need to fix. So what's your thoughts on that?
That's another big question. I guess I don't think you'll ever really fix it, because it's not, you know, we need to define the problem first to sort of then be able to fix it. But I know what you're saying. I think, look, there's so many different layers to that. So the food we're producing now, getting back to being a commodity farmer, it's cheap, it's subsidised by the environment, and people expect food to be cheap, and that's the standard that's now set. So to raise the bar with quality and price, that can be challenging for people to get their head around, because they don't appreciate the value in that, right? They don't appreciate that it's going to cost more to produce an organic thing, in theory, and they're not willing to do that because they don't see the value of that extra couple of dollars or whatever it is, because they're not valuing their health. That's probably the easiest way to put it, you know, because that's where the buck stops with us as mums and dads feeding our children. It's really about health. The impact that food has in the environment is so far removed from them that that's a hard one to sort of get them to pay attention to, I think. Unless you get them to a farm, they see erosion, they see depleted soil, they see it blowing away, they have an experience with nature that might prompt them to think, wow, that's a scar on the landscape, that's hurting, that's salinity, that's whatever. You know, there's got to be, but again, it's still not hurting them. It's just, you know, doesn't feel good and look good. So I think, you know, that's probably the greatest motivation that I think if we can instill in mums and dads and people is your own human health, and get them to put a value on it, you know. And the more money they spend now on the food they eat means less money they're going to spend in the hospital and with the doctor. And you know, one of my great dreams is that, you know, we actually can combine the agricultural department and the health department. You know, that should be the same department because they're intrinsically linked. And, you know, if the legislation and, you know, regulations and guidelines or whatever the Department of Ag do, you know, is aligned with health objectives, that would be a game changer. Now, I'm not suggesting it's going to happen tomorrow, but just as a way of identifying the connection between the two. You know, you grow better food, you have healthier people. You know, whether they live longer or whatever is, you know, it's more about the quality of life, you know, quality of our thinking. So that is, I guess, you know, getting back to your question, Tracy, about how can we motivate people? It's just, if we can motivate them to think more about their children, let's just say it's their children's health, and make it really clear and simple that the stuff you put in their mouth is going to make them sick or make them healthy. It's your choice today. When you go shopping, it's your choice. You know, what you cook in your kitchen is your choice. What you buy at the takeaway is your choice, and you got to think about the implications of that. You know, the way they're going to develop, the way they're going to think, because nutrition. You know, the brain is an organ; it needs nutrition, and the better nutrition we give it, the better it thinks. Literally, it's just, that's not rocket science, you know. And the more we understand about the gut biome, the more we understand about how, you know, that's a second brain. You know, we have a heart brain, a head brain, and a gut brain, and a lot of people would argue that the gut brain is the most important thing because it's the interface with our environment, basically. You know, that's where the blood, you know, the nutrients are. That's the pathway to get to the brain to feed it the nutrients. So it's the first port of call, and you know, chemicals like glyphosate completely obliterate that gut blood barrier there. You know, and then, you know, leaky gut is a symptom of that. And so, you know, again, it comes down to what are you feeding your kids? You know, the quality of it, you know, how much chemicals in it, and how much nutrition is in that food. They're the two main things, you know, chemical load and nutrient density. You know, if we can, there's some great technologies being developed, if not already, where you can literally get a phone and run it across an apple and work out the chemical load, you know, the chemical residues on it, and the nutritional density. I mean, there's little machines, I haven't got one here now, called a Brix meter or a refractometer, and you basically get the juice of an apple, say, you put it on this little bit of glass and you shine it up the light, and there's a little scale in there, and it'll give you a number, and you can reference that number. I've actually got a little scale here somewhere. You can reference that number and see whether it's, you know, say, I'm pulling numbers out of nowhere now, but say 16 is a really good number for an apple, like an organic, nutrient-dense apple. 10 is a pretty crappy one, you know. as an example. So we have the tools, we have the technology. There's no excuse for not knowing. You know, shows like yours, you know, there's just no excuse anymore. Now it's a decision. It's everyone's decision. Back to the vegan thing you touched on there before, Tracy. You know, that's again a big conversation, and you know, you can split it into. I split it into three things. There's a great book on this, by the way, Matthew Evans, on eating meat. And if anyone wants to really get a good handle, a good balanced, objective look at all this, just grab a copy of that. It's fantastic. And there's an ethical argument, or you know, position, environmental, and nutritional. And there's three. Ethical is pretty subjective. And the environmental and nutritional, I mean, they're pretty objective, you know. And I always, when I'm stepping into these, not these conversations, but ones with others who don't like other people to eat meat, I say to them, okay, what are we trying to, what can we agree on? You know, are we agreeing on that we want to reduce suffering? I'm just, you know, fast tracking this conversation. You know, do we agree on? No, only just because it can get really tedious when you're having this conversation with a vegan, say. But I say, you know, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to reduce suffering. Yes, okay. In their eyes, suffering is, you know, pigs in stalls in factories and cows and bunnies, fluffy things, you know. What they often don't think about, and we go, yeah, we agree, we want to reduce suffering. Well, then it's pretty simple to identify the suffering that happens in the production of plant-based foods. You know, every year 30,000 ducks are shot to produce rice in Victoria. Now that's suffering, I reckon. Now that number, don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. It came out of Matt's book, but might be on New South Wales and Victoria. My point is, a lot of ducks get shot to produce rice. Right? So, you know, I think it's a bit rich if anyone says that by excluding meat from their diet or eggs, or, you know, they have a vegan diet, they're not still having an impact on animals, you know, fluffy animals or feathered animals, you know, rats and mice, and, you know, being poisoned in paddocks producing particular crops, which are, you know, plant crops, that sort of thing. So, you know, there are hundreds of thousands of native animals in Australia that get tortured and killed by feral cats every night. You know, that's a lot of suffering. And I think, you know, if people's objectives were to reduce suffering, and I think that's probably as simple as we need to sort of make it, then a lot of people who are badgering farmers, who are probably doing not a bad job, I have to say, you know, industrial farming, feedlotting, that sort of type of farming, I'm not a big fan of, because it is industrial and it is, you know, there's a degree of suffering and it's not a natural way to do things. So I agree with the vegans if that's part of their argument. Absolutely, let's reduce that suffering.
Yeah.
That type of farming. But if we were to really look at, you know, what is suffering and how can we make an impact, the biggest impact any vegan can make is to contribute to the removal of feral cats in Australia. That will be the biggest mark they will make. Trap them, shoot them, but they're fluffy and they're cute and they're in calendars, and that's a really tough thing for them to get. Like, oh, you know, they're not that bad, are they? It's like, yes, they are. So, you know, and I'm not being critical of vegans. I'm just saying, let's be objective. If we want to reduce suffering, let's get rid of feral cats. You know, that's better than. When this happened in Victoria a couple of years ago at Taranaki Farm, some people got in there and to release the chickens, right? Because they were, you know, and they were in probably one of the best facilities. You know, they're in a paddock, they're on grass, they've got nice shelter, they've got all their needs are met, happy as. Let's release them into the wild and save them, and they got nailed by a bunch of foxes, or, you know, like it's ignorance at the end of the day, you know. I'm not here to have an argument with anyone. It's really about making informed decisions, and I'm all for it, you know. And environmentally, just you know, give me a grass-fed beef, you know, steak any day than a soy burger or something, because I know what chemicals are sprayed on soy. I know they're GM. You know, that's the thing. It's like, oh, we're saving cows, but we're saving the planet by getting rid of cows and eating soy. It's like, my God, it's frankenfood, and it's monoculture, and it's destroying the environment, and it's high chemical use, and it's high preservative use, antibiotics, you know, and the whole Impossible Burger and whatever the other one was.
The Beyond Meat one.
Beyond Meat. It's just crazy, because it's not the answer. Now, technology is not. That's technology. You can't solve a biological problem with technology. You know, you got to use biology to solve a biological problem. If the problem is environmental degradation, that's basically a biological process plus a whole lot of other things. But you know, there's no quick fix with you know, these crazy ingredients that go into a burger that's supposed to save the planet. It could not be further from the truth, you know. So that's my long-winded answer there, Tracy. But it is such a big topic. No, it's such a big topic, and everyone has their position, and that's fine. You know, I don't try and convince anyone. I just say, look, maybe just look at these things a bit, you know.
But that's the thing. Everyone does have their position, and it's my view is that people aren't given the right information to make these, you know, choices, to make choices. I mean, I know many mums that actually will go to the supermarket and will choose a Beyond Meat burger or plant-based one, and they honestly believe they're doing the right thing for their children and for the planet. So the misinformation out there, it's not balanced. People aren't given enough information to make choices, which is why, you know, what you're sharing is so important to help people change their thinking, make their decisions, make right decisions when you think about the impacts and the long-term impacts. That's my issue. I just don't think it's fair, because the media, you know, vested interests, religious ideology, all that stuff are so vested in a plant-based future. But when we actually can look at all the information and have a balanced view of it, we can see exactly what you say. It's not the answer. It's not the answer for the planet. It's not the answer for our health and for our children's health. And what about our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren? What sort of future are they going to have if the world is plant-based? You know, I come from a nutritional perspective, and I know nutritionally that a vegan diet is suboptimal, and it's suboptimal in severe ways, and that is passed on through to the baby and the next generation, so much that they've seen brains that are not, you know, they're suboptimal brains in children born of vegans. And that's what I mean. I just don't think people have the right information. And, you know, I think what you've said is just giving people so much more to think about. And, you know, we do have choices, and we can make our own choices, but it's nice if we can have all the information on the table in order to make those choices. And it's so unfair that most people don't know.
And a lot of it's quite logical, you know. Again, if you just dig a little bit deeper into, you know, whether it's Impossible Burgers or just you know, the soy alternative to meat, or, you know, it's, you think about just ask how it's produced, you know, like as I was saying before, you know, ask how meat's produced. As Diana says, it's not the cow, it's the how. You know, the cows aren't the villains. It's how it's produced. It's how it's reared. It's how it's treated. Is the thing that we've got to be asking questions about. Was this pork grown in a factory where there was, you know, the sow was in a sow stall and it didn't see light, and, you know, it was fed with a heap of antibiotics, and, you know, that's very different to the type of pig production we do, where we've got them free ranging and they're foraging, and they're, I reckon, pretty happy because we give them the opportunity to do that. They're very intelligent creatures. So that's all about how and where they're produced and under what sort of conditions. So you're right. You don't have to dig very deep. You have to just apply a bit of logic. You know, there's soy, is it GM or isn't it GM? Even if it's not GM, how is it produced? How much chemical are you using? And how much chemical are you now giving your kids on that spoon when you're giving them that tofu or something? I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my tofu as long as it's organic and I know it's, you know, it's clean, but it's not a pillar of my diet, you know. And having, you know, I I love plants as much as anyone. I rely on plants in terms of the grass and the trees and the environment and the biology on my farm. So I'm not anti-plant at all. You know, anyone wants to know a bit more about plants, and this is something that any, you know, I guess listeners or viewers, you know, who doubt the sort of the intelligence or the sensitivity of plants, read a book called The Secret Life of Plants. Someone Tompkins, there's two guys. Secret Life of Plants. There's a part in there about a guy who hooks up a lie detector, you know, the ones that have the, you know, your lie detector, I think is the proper word for it, on his palm, right, on his tree in his office. And the thing is moving, like he's like yelling at his plant and goes, you know, it's responding like 100%, and it's fascinating. I can't remember what page or what chapter. That 3 pages, he talks about that. He talks about an experiment he did. He talks about how his plant responded when he was 500 miles away at a conference talking about his beautiful plant. It's 500 miles away on the lie detector machine, responding because it could sense him talking about it and showing him love from 500 miles away. It's fascinating. I mean, the fungal hyphae that exists under trees, in the ground, in soil, from tree to tree, and, you know, the fungal highways that transport nutrients and information, like Avatar, that whole thing is not that far from the truth, to be honest. Even though James Cameron's a vegan and not a big fan of, you know, even the stuff we do, he got that bit right in terms of the life that is in the soil and the amazing, the biology, you know, it's the essence of all life at the end of the day. You know, we eat plants that are grown in it. You know, we're products of it. So yeah, no, it's a big question, and it's just about making informed decisions, and don't mouth off at people. I don't criticise myself. I don't criticise anyone except really myself, what I used to do, and I don't try and tell people what they should do, because, you know, those who, they just lose me straight up. You know, you shouldn't do this, and why are you doing that? I've been rung up and abused about it. You don't plant trees and you kill animals, and your cows' farts are killing the planet. I mean, what do you say to that sort of thing? You know, I just show compassion. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Show compassion. I'm just glad I'm not that angry about the world, and move on.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Can you just clear up one thing though, with one of the biggest myths out there around cows and the environment? I know it's probably a big conversation, but the whole thing around, like, the water. You know, there's something that people think, oh, but beef cattle, they can, you know, they take up so much water, and of course the methane is, you know.
Yeah. Well, again, there'd be questions. Methane is interesting because, I mean, there's lots of ways we can look at that. Okay, so methane, production of methane, bovines, whether you're a bison or a cow in Australia or a bison in North America, they produce methane, right? That's just the way their bodies function. And in North America, there was some hundreds of millions of bison roaming in North America before they were pretty much wiped out. They were all producing methane. I believe there's this equivalent or less number of cattle and bison in North America now. So the net, I believe I'm right in saying, the net production of methane from bovines in North America now is less than it used to be, right? Just as a, you know, let's just even say it's the same. So we're actually not making an impact. It's just a different type of animal doing it, and that goes the same for Africa as well, the wildebeest and so on. So methane production isn't really a problem, given that, I don't believe, for another reason I'll get to, because we're not producing more methane now than we did 300 years ago on the planet. That's pretty straightforward. So, and there's also, I was interviewing Walter Jenner, who's a scientist in microbiologist I think he's based in Canberra, loveliest man in the world. He put him in his show notes. He's fascinating. He talked about a bacteria that in an environment where cattle or bison or ruminants are grazing, that is normal, as in on grass, and there's normal transpiration and water cycling, which is essentially what most regenerative graziers are doing. There's a bacteria that, as the methane is produced and goes into the atmosphere, in a zone above the animals, and I don't know how many meters or half a kilometre or whatever it is, exists a bacteria that actually attaches itself to the methane and breaks it down and turns it into a much less mobile gas, right? And actually, I think 90% of the methane produced from a cow is broken down in that environment with that type of grazing, is broken down within hours or within days. So really, there's a whole lot of science around the methane thing. So let's put that aside. What was the water thing? I mean, really, when someone says cows use a heap of water, I mean, the best thing I go back to is, well, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? Feedlot cows or cows on grass? That pretty much stops them most of the time because they don't know the difference. They don't know there is, or they don't know this is using this much water and they're using that much water. I mean, in a feedlot situation, you can measure how much water is produced because they're using, because it's all from the trough, right? And they're on a very small area. So even if they include the rain that falls, it's a very small area that you've got water catchment, and you've got water that's being fed to them in troughs. So you can measure that easily. When the argument comes up about cows, cows use so much water. Okay, let's identify if it's on grass. Yeah, they use so much water. It's like, but most of the water that falls on that land, they're talking about the rain that's falling on that land, right? So say there's 1,000 acres and cows are on that land. The calculations that are made to come to this statement, they're looking at, that land is being used by cows. All the water that falls on that is being used by the cows. That's how they get these numbers. I'm dead serious, right? A very small fraction of that water that fell on that land that you're using in the calculations actually gets used by a cow, gets drunk by a cow. Yes, it waters the plants that the cows then eat, but that water is not free water. There's a word for it. They talk about green water, blue water, and white water or something. I should get my head around that. But it's you've got to really look at it and go, okay, you can't include that. That's going to fall on that landscape, whether there's a cow, a sheep, a pig, a crop of GMO soy. That's still the same amount of rainfall falling on it. So you've just got to ask more questions and say, so where's that information come from? Is it considerate of the rainfall, or is it what they're drinking? Getting into these arguments with people is a symptom of misinformation and ignorance, because they're just going, oh, I read on this website that cows use up all this water. It's like, okay, let's break that down. Does that sort of make sense? It's really about asking them better questions, and going, okay, well, where's that from? And that's pretty generic. And before too long, they either realise that they got the wrong information, or they just should shut up anyway, because it's just not an argument. You've got to go, if they're going to go into battle, which they often do, come with the right weapons, weapons being information. Don't just throw some generic rubbish at me, because, and the thing that sort of is interesting is that I think I'm contributing to the world in some ways, like a lot of farmers are, like a lot of regenerative farmers are, and when you get, and it doesn't worry me because it happens, and it's can be entertaining if anything, but it's sort of like, wow, haven't you got something better to do? I don't know. I sometimes say, how many trees have you planted in your life? I don't know. Like, having a keep cup is not going to save the planet. Go and sequester carbon. Plant a tree, join a land care group, get to know your farmer, help them grow better food, and feed your kids better food too. Getting back to that full circle. So, it's a big conversation, that whole thing, and you're never going to have an argument with a vegan, and they're going to turn around and go, you know what, Tracy, thank you for informing me. I'm going to change my diet, and I'm going to, vice versa. No vegan's going to have a yarn with someone like me and change my mind, because I base my position on experience and information. That's what I like to. That's. So I'm happy to stand in that position and talk about it. And we've all got many other things to worry and think about and do and contribute to than arguing about that till the cows come home.
Literally. I love it. Can I ask, what is the percentage, if we can talk about Australia? Most of my audience is in Australia, obviously. So what would be the percentage of regenerative farmers versus conventional farms? Do you know?
Great question, Tracy. It's increasing. I don't know, 5%, 2%. I don't know, somewhere around there. It's in the single digits for sure. I mean, having said that, it gets back to that how I started with the, what's the definition? I think a lot of farmers are actually doing this stuff anyway. They are working with nature. They still might be using chemicals, but they're probably, reducing their chemical load. They're fencing off erosion areas. They're changing their style of management and their grazing maybe a bit differently, and one would argue a bit better. They're probably sequestering a bit of carbon. There's a consciousness that's pervading the industry, and again, it's based on experience and science. And people are kind of going, yeah, okay, I see how that could work. I'm getting emails pretty much every day now from people saying farmers, and not even just farmers, but a lot of them are either farmers or they want to be a farmer, and they're going, you know what, I listened to your podcast, I read a couple of books, I can't unhear and unsee and unfeel what I'm feeling now. What's in this? What do I do? What do I do now? And that's great, because it's only going one direction, and that's from the farming point of view, right? The other end of this of the journey of food is mums and dads, people shopping, eaters. The eaters aren't going into the local grocery shop saying, can you get in some more of that GMO soy? It was delicious. And they're not saying, can you get in that lettuce that's been sprayed with Lemat? Like, they're just not saying that. They're going into the grocery stores and saying, can you get some more organic stuff in? Can you tell me where that food's from? Can you identify to me somehow that it's clean, it's chemical free, or like people are getting it, and people are asking, as I said, asking better questions. Whether it's your butcher, the person your fruit and veg shop down the road, your fish shop, I mean, anything, ask better questions. And even when you're at the restaurant, I love going, the steak on the menu, and I ask, is it grain fed or is it grass fed? And they go, sometimes they say, oh, it's grain fed, sir, thinking that's what I want to hear.
That's
and I go, well,
yeah.
And I say, well, that's a pity. I'll have the fish, thanks. Well, they don't know at all, so ask them. And then, the waiters and waitresses will be going back to the kitchen going, wow, a heap of people asking for grass fed, and if we had it, we'd have sold it, and they didn't, and that connection that I really think the retail world and chefs especially have a critical role to play in the middle, because they are between farmers and eaters. And, the more informed they are, the more interested and curious about where the food's coming from that they're then served and putting on a plate, then that's got to be a good thing for their customers, and that's got to be a good thing for the world, because they're supporting those farmers who are doing a better job, and not, the environment is not being as subsidised anymore. The customer is not subsidising the farmer, but they're paying a fair price for that food. And they're going to have to, and that's the thing. And the other beautiful thing there, quickly, Tracy, is the more nutrient dense it is, the less you need to eat. If you look at cents or dollars per unit of nutrition, whatever however you want to measure that, like, organic stuff far outweighs. We eat too much stuff anyway. So, I just don't listen to people when they say, oh, it's too expensive, I can't afford it. It's like, well, you look in your shopping trolley, take 2/3 of it out. Anything that your great-grandmother wouldn't recognise, just leave on the shelf, and try starting there.
Yeah, I love it. Great advice. Great advice. So just one thing you have read, I've read here, is that you're not certified organic nor biodynamic. Was that a conscious choice because of the hoops you were going to have to go through to get that?
Yeah, that was part of it. I guess there was a degree of laziness, but it was more. I mean, really, it was more an informed decision. We've looked at it so many times now. We've looked at all the certification bodies, the sort of the processes, the paperwork, and we just made a choice that we didn't want to rely on and comply with a label that didn't necessarily in the I guess the principles of that certification body identify quality. Okay, I'm not saying that it's not good quality, or stuff that's got the stamp that's organic and biodynamic on it isn't good quality. It's more, I'm interested in the outcome. We say we're certified by community, which is a bit of a catchphrase of Joel Salatin in the United States. If anyone hasn't heard of Joel Salatin, look him up. He's amazing. You know, we prefer to get the feedback from our customers. We prefer to be transparent. We prefer that the nutritional, you know, our cleanliness and the nutritional density of our food speak for itself. And if people need a stamp on a product to buy it, that's fine. There's plenty of others that are doing that, and that's fantastic. But it's, to me, that certification, the current certification environment is not certifying for quality necessarily. You know, lots of good stuff is being certified. I'd rather a stamp that actually says this is nutritiously dense compared to, you know, whatever other reference point it is, and it's completely clean of chemical. That's a certification I would put my hand up for. And one of the offshoots of that too is, you know, and this is again a discussion that lots of people have, is, well, what are the indicators that, you know, it could be certified? And one is how much carbon is being sequestered. You know, that's another output, as it were, of this type of production. You know, so you've got nutritious, clean, nutritiously dense, chemical-free food, and that's what the consumer is experiencing, and the farmer is experiencing more carbon in his soil because the practices that he's engaged to produce that food are good for the environment as well, because you're sequestering carbon. You're creating soil quality and quantity, and that's a good thing, you know. Chris Miliotis is a very smart man who I know, and he sums it up. I'm going to paraphrase it here, but he says that, you know, that the solution to the global environmental and human health crisis is what we choose to eat and what's beneath our feet, and that's as complicated as it needs to be. It's what we choose to eat. You know, is it good for me or not? And if we're focusing on soil health, what's beneath our feet, we're going to grow good food anyway, and start healing the planet.
Thank you. So just last question before I let you go. Is there a list of farms like you, or are we, you know, is it going to local farmers markets, just doing our research around what's in the local area? I'm in Melbourne, so there's a lot around here as well. But what would be the best place for people to start, you know, making better choices around this stuff and supporting farmers like you?
Yeah. Well, the first and easiest thing is just to ask better questions anywhere you get food. You know, hotels, restaurants, supermarkets, little grocery stores. Just ask better questions, and they don't have to be very complicated. Just go, where's it from? Is it clean? You know, is it local? Go to farmers markets. You know, find out where your local community gardens are, because there's lots of little community veggie gardens growing up all over the place. Some are run by council, some are, you know, council have given land over to community groups to grow food. Some are within schools. You know, get back to nature is one thing that is not just, it's not necessarily all about what you put in your mouth. It's the environment you're in. You know, Zach Bush, Dr. Zach Bush, amazing Dr. Zach Bush. Oh, you're going to love him. And your listeners with Dr. Zach Bush, Breathe Your Biome as a tag, and he is a triple board certified doctor in the States. I did some work with him in Melbourne in March, and he talks about gut health. He was working on cancer treatments for many years, and he sort of worked out that that wasn't the way to cure. You know, he sort of went back through this process and what is actually causing the cancer. And he's got lots of theories, and it's more than theories. A lot of practical experience he's had now. A lot of it's to do with the chemicals in our food. Lots to do with our thinking, you know, our mindset, and lots to do with the environment we're living in. And, you know, being cooped up in isolation in an apartment in Melbourne for 2 weeks or 3 months is going to, you know, it's that disconnect with nature. I mean, that's an extreme example, but kids growing up without falling out of trees, swimming in dams. This is just in the city, right? You know, walking down the street barefoot, rolling around the grass in the backyard, you know, smooching the dog, eating mud. You know, that is literally the biome and the exchange with nature that we as humans are meant to have. You know, sterilisation, anti this, anti that. You know, kids just not having the life experience. In the world of Steiner, which is what, you know, biodynamics is sort of, you know, Steiner introduced biodynamics to the world. It's about the first 7 years of life is about understanding yourself as an individual, but also understanding your place in nature. Now, if you're not in nature, how are you ever going to do that? You know, if you're not scratching your knees, falling over, eating what your mum wouldn't want you to, and having those experiences, you're not, like, literally our immune system needs that to trade information with nature, because nature again is there to heal us, to train our bodies, to adapt to and boost our immune system, so that when a virus comes along, we've got the wherewithal to actually fight. You don't even need there's no fight. This is the interesting thing. There's no need to have a fight with the thing. It's one of a billion. What did you say the other day? Like trillions of viruses in the world, and you know, it's just another virus. I know people are going to say it's not just another virus, and maybe it's not. But my point is, our bodies, if we're healthy, if we're fit, if we're part of nature, man, the human race has been fighting viruses for however many years, and it's a disconnect. You know, getting to that point of people having to isolate for months. I mean, I'm not surprised if more people die from that than the actual direct result of COVID. You know, like I just think that depression, the immunity is going to be suppressed. They're going to walk outside when the gates are finally open. Bang.
I know.
You know, I really worry about how that, you know, Sweden and Switzerland, they just didn't do isolation, didn't do all of that stuff. And look where they're up to now. If you're not sure, Google that. They're pretty much, you know, the health authorities are saying, well, we're on the other side of this now. We just let the natural, you know, take course. And yes, people die, but you know, that's no laughing matter. But you know, that's another conversation. I probably don't want to go near. But I mean, I getting back to my point, nature is where we find our medicine, and we don't even have to take it. We just have to be in it. We have to breathe the biome, as Zach Bush says. You know, the air that's been in the lungs of that wedge-tailed eagle up there. You know. We connect with that. It's fascinating stuff, and there's so much science around this now. We literally communicate with our breath, and the more we do, the stronger we'll be.
Wow. Thank you so much. You have been amazing and shared so much information for people to take away and think about, and I can't thank you enough. I'm going to have all the information below on your podcast and where people can find you. And yeah, just thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm so glad you had your epiphanies and doing what you're doing. It's amazing. So thank you so much.
Tracy, thank you so much. I was listening to some of your podcasts the other day. I love them with Belinda. I can't get a yes, fascinating. I'd heard her and her husband on another podcast some years ago, and it just was a great reminder of that whole craziness of that world, you know, and what they had to go through and the fight they put up, and thank God they did, because they set some great standards for everyone else. So thank you for doing what you're doing and making a difference. And you know, the more that we share our stories and can inform people, I think that's one of the roles we can play in all this.
That's it. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Tracy.